Everybody, welcome to another Lunch and Learn for the Flipping Finance Challenge, and we'll have a few folks continuing to join us. And we are so excited that you have chosen to spend your lunch with us and this fantastic team from Frost Brown Todd. Scott and Emma are here to join us, and Frost Brown has been the supporter from day one of Flipping Finance Challenge. And I think back at first year, back when people had corded headphones, I'm sure nobody except me still uses them. They sponsored our Tech Taco. So it still gets good use in the Woolner household. Have not moved over to more sophisticated technology yet, which doesn't surprise anybody who knows me probably. And so with that, again, thank you, Scott and Emma. And we are so excited. I'm super excited to learn about kryptonite at the office, how not to be it, how to avoid it. So turn it over, Scott. And again, thank you for sharing your time and your insight with our Flipping Finance Challenge innovators.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you, Mark. And I'm so glad to see the Tech Taco is still getting good use. So that's wonderful. Well, thank you, everybody, for the opportunity to share a lunch session with you all. Emma and I are really excited to share some of our insights into what we're calling kryptonite at the office and how to avoid it. So this will just kind of be an overview of some things that we've seen, some maybe mistakes that we've made, and what we've learned from along the way that'll hopefully be helpful. Following this presentation, don't hesitate to reach out to us. We're happy to be a resource, however that we can moving forward. But as Mark mentioned, my name is Scott Croft. I'm an attorney at Frost Brown Todd here in our Indianapolis office. I practice in our public finance practice group, and just want to say before I turn over to Emma for introductions, congratulations to all of you for the hard work you've put into this Flipping Finance Challenge so far. You should feel really proud of it, and I know the finish line is in sight. So Emma?
Yes, congratulations to everyone as well, and thank you for letting us present. My name is Emma Mulvaney, and I am a second-year associate in the Columbus, Ohio office of Frost Brown Todd, so pretty recent graduate.
So our theme here, like we said, is kryptonite at the office. We're going to tie it to kind of the overall theme of the Flipping Finance Challenge in terms of helping all of you civic superheroes navigate the office environment. And as we were kind of planning for this event, Emma and I were sort of thinking, what really is a superhero? And to be honest, it doesn't seem like there's any sort of definition that has to fit anyone in particular, which we think is really cool, right? So you can kind of define your own path and really be your own superheroes in whatever way that you find useful. In our context today, will be in the context of an office, but there are so many other ways that all of you can contribute valuably your skills and expertise and experiences. So, and the other part that we were thinking of is really, what is kryptonite? And when we kind of were looking around to think, how do we frame this in terms of avoiding the kryptonite? Kryptonite seems to have kind of not so much of a short-term impact negatively on people, but on the long term, it seems to have more of a detrimental impact, right? So kind of keep that in mind as we go through this presentation, that, maybe there might be some short-term slips or things that, Em and I share that we've done, but the context might be that might come back later as something that could be viewed negatively or positively for that matter, in terms of your long-term career development. So with that, those are our introductory remarks. Emma, I'll pass it over to you to get the slideshow started.
Okay, and sorry, I may have to, so I've been having some tech issues, so if I can't get it connected, if you have it, Scott, that would be.
Yep, no problem. Bear with me one second.
Also share screen if that helps, Scott. I got it up.
Yeah, Mark, if you don't mind.
Yep, I'll do it. And you just holler at me when to switch. You see, everybody see, got it?
Good to go. Yep, next slide, Mark.
Man, you're testing me already? Okay.
I know. We're getting it started here.
We went ahead today and kind of divided, especially given the current state of working and how there's a little uncertainty, and also just a little Bit of a different landscape than maybe 5 years ago, especially because of the pandemic. So even though a lot of these are applicable regardless of the location, we did go ahead and break this up into corporate and then work from home. So because there are definitely some differences based on location. So first is don't assume how your managers communicate or prefer work product. And also kind of going along with this, maybe don't assume it is how you would communicate or prefer work product.
Yeah, and so the do here is obviously communicate prior to beginning a project with your manager. And, you know, as Emma and I were sort of thinking through this one a little bit, the key aspect for everybody to note here is that communication is the critical component. And when you kind of think about some of the best superheroes that are out there, right, think of those key teams that work together and how they communicate effectively. We were thinking of the X-Men and the Guardians of the Galaxy and just how they all kind of communicate effectively together to, you know, get what they need to done. And when issues seem to arise, right, it seems that there might be some sort of a communication breakdown, whether that's among team members or with those that they're serving. So really, when you're thinking about your office environment, make sure that in particular with your managers and supervisors that you have those open lines of communication, but also understand too, right, that there might be breakdowns. There might be times when you're in a stressful situation or something comes up where people aren't communicating effectively. And as Em and I have experienced, we find that when we find ourselves in those positions, find your allies, right? Maybe it's your mentors, maybe it's other office colleagues who you can go to for advice. You know, hopefully your office environments will be conducive to fostering that type of teamwork and collaborative environment in terms of communication. Emma, anything else to add from your perspective there?
No, I think you said that well. Thank you.
All right, Mark, next slide.
Okay, so this don't is about waiting to reach out regarding assignments. Mark.
And so obviously here, we want to make sure that we keep managers in the loop and respond to notifying them, you know, for example, if you get an email with a project, and that can be something really basic, right? Maybe at that moment, you don't have a lot of time to get the entire project done, but at least acknowledge receipt, a simple, hey, thanks, got it, or I'm on it, or I'll get back to you as soon as I can, or if it's time sensitive, please let me know. One thing that's really important, and we'll talk about it in a little later slide, but managing deadlines and expectations as it relates to deadlines is important right when you get a new project or an assignment. And Em and I can speak to this from the legal perspective. It's obviously really critical at times in our world that we stay on top of deadlines and manage those appropriately. So one tip that I use is obviously calendar both personal and professional obligations and commitments. And in addition to that, for any sort of client obligations, we develop internal timelines and checklists to make sure that we're staying on top of things, right? Because the last thing that we want to do is deliver a poor quality of service to our clients by way of just missing some sort of an easy deadline or something that we could have effectively managed had we had it more structured in terms of a timeline and a checklist. Emma, what are some tips that you have here?
So I think that this is extremely important for a couple or from a couple perspectives. So first is from the manager or the person who's giving the assignment. If you don't respond to let them know that you're taking this assignment on, depending on how long it takes for you to reach out, if you don't confirm that, they may go ahead and give that assignment to someone else, which then would cause conflict, and also you could be recreating some work in wasting time. But from your perspective as the person who's taking the assignment on, this is important because it will help you if you respond given how much time do you have to complete the project, but also any of your questions or even a response may come back with more information, which could help you complete the assignment.
All right, next slide, Mark.
So don't ignore the dress codes.
And do appropriately dress, you know, obviously, you know, be comfortable and you want to be yourself. But but be mindful of the situation and circumstances, right? So whether you're underdressed or overdressed for your environment, and that's really situationally specific. So again, here, right, you don't have to figure it out on your own. You may have an event upcoming that you see the attendee list, and it might seem like some very high profile individuals, or maybe a senior leadership executive from your company is going to be in your office for the day. You might just want to ask, is there anything in particular that I should be mindful of in terms of how I should be dressed for that meeting? And again, if you have mentors or colleagues, certainly rely on them. I know in kind of a post-COVID environment, we're seeing a lot of sort of what we're calling dress for your day policies, right? So maybe one day jeans are absolutely appropriate, but maybe for another day it might not be. For example, a formal client event or a meeting, and know that those first impressions are really important. Emma, go ahead, and then I'll respond to the question here.
I saw that question. And I will say that one of the easy fallbacks on this is dress codes. So knowing, and you may need to, if there's something that's unclear in that, or even like Scott was saying, if it's a dress code for an event, clarifying that. I know dress codes for weddings and events, I think, are a little vague, but it's a good place to start.
So what is Frost Brown Todd's policy on wearing superhero costumes to work? This is a great question, right? So Emma and I are both thrilled that Frost Brown Todd has a dress for your day policy, right? So I think we could, Emma, easily have said, well, today we're giving the superhero presentation. So clearly, if we're dressing for our day appropriately, we need to have the costumes. Now, I don't know what our FBT superhero is. So if anybody out there has ideas of a creative superhero that we can adopt, I think we're all ears.
Well, and I'll just say that not all heroes wear capes. So who's to say it isn't in a suit?
Well done.
That's fantastic. And I experienced this, just to add on to what you've said, I've experienced this at my first work conference when I started a job. It was and that's one where you can't go back to your closet, like you're there for 2 or 3 days. And I brought, I think, a pair of khakis and maybe a button up, but everybody else was fully suited up, and I kind of just missed the mark on that. So you do your best to kind of blend in, but that was certainly embarrassing. So like Emma said, work events, including conferences, those will vary. I've seen them very casual, and I've seen them, unfortunately in my case, the first one, fully suited up, suit and tie.
Yeah, and another tip is it might not be a bad idea to have maybe some sort of a formal, whether it's a easy jacket that you can put on, something in your office, or leave it in your trunk of your car that you can go and grab, just in case you need it in a tight spot. It might not be perfect, but it's at least one way to make you ultimately feel maybe a little more comfortable in those situations.
Okay. Don't be late or tardy to scheduled events or meetings, even if virtual.
Obviously, you want to arrive early. It makes a good impression, more than and it really builds an impression of trust right from the get-go. As I was thinking about this slide, I'm not a superhero expert, but the one who came to mind is the Flash, right? So his civilian identity is, he's kind of always late, and then kind of utilizes the superhero speed to get caught up or get to the next thing. And you certainly don't want to do that, right? You don't want to be rushed to the extent you can. So again, the impression really more than anything, especially as you're starting out, your careers and wanting to build levels of trust with your colleagues and those external of your company, that's just really important. Emma, anything else from you?
Yeah, and I think we may touch on this in a later slide, but it's important to, if you can, arrive early, because then you may have those conversations before the meeting starts where you can build rapport with the other, coworkers or managers. So that kind of informal situation really lends itself to building relationships, but also arriving on time or arriving early shows that you value other people's time. And I think that's really important to build respect and to build your own reputation.
Great. Next slide.
Okay, don't miss deadlines.
Communicate, especially if you're concerned you won't meet a deadline, right? So again, this kind of goes back to what we talked about a few slides ago. Things are going to happen, and that's okay. Maybe there's an urgent project that comes across your desk, or you just have a personal circumstance that you need to attend to. That's completely fine in workplaces, and you just need to make sure that if those come up, that you're communicating effectively to the extent you can. The urgent ones are a little more difficult, right, than those that maybe you knew about a few weeks ago and you just forgot to mention something to the manager or supervisor. But generally, right, communication is really the key. And I shared a few slides ago kind of the tools that we use here at FBT in terms of calendaring and timelines, but know that there's really no one size fits all. So whatever works best for you is great. You might find that another tool works in terms of helping you keep up on those deadlines and manage expectations, and that's great. Continue to do that. But if you're ever looking for tips or resources, you've got colleagues at your workplace, there's all sorts of great resources, external, publicly available too, that you can rely on as well. Emma, what kind of things do you use?
So I definitely use my calendar for everything. I also make a ridiculous amount of lists. But when it comes to deadlines, I've found that there are kind of a couple types of deadlines. So you have the hard deadline that you have to absolutely make because it's not an informal. I feel like there are a couple of times where someone needs it for a certain purpose and you know that they need it on that date, and so there's no wiggle room. Or it's, we would like, an internal deadline that's set, or a goal deadline. And so ultimately it will take you a while to learn between those two, and it may be different in different industries. But one thing that I would say is kind of doing status updates, or even if I get a new assignment from the same person that I have something outstanding, relying on them to ask, hey, okay, this is great, I can do this, but what is the priority between the assignments? Or I can do this, but it may take me a little longer. Just doing those types of communication can help me determine what my focus should be, or whether there's any wiggle room if I get a little inundated with work.
Great. Mark, next slide.
Okay, initiative. Don't sit in your office or wait to be asked.
So take the action, be vocal about your willingness to help, find ways, to make your coworkers' lives easier. As I was sort of thinking about this slide, the superhero who came to mind was Batman, right? So think about, Bruce Wayne. He sort of stays out of the spotlight in his civilian, kind of role, and, secludes to the Batcave every now and then. And that's completely fine. It's not to say that you always have to be the vocal or outgoing one in the room. And if that's your personality, great. There are valuable ways that you can contribute in that regard. A tip that we find here at Frost Brown Todd is find colleagues who maybe balance out your personality, so that when you're either giving a client presentation or delivering a work product or otherwise, that you can kind of have maybe someone who's more comfortable in a public speaking setting versus and compared to someone who might be more comfortable behind the scenes, working on the content, helping you navigate the PowerPoint slides and those kinds of things. So Emma, what came to mind from your perspective here?
So I think that going off of your Bruce Wayne, you kind of, in his situation, he doesn't come until you use the bat signal. So I think there's a way that you can be proactive about getting work or about keeping yourself busy, and that's appreciated by a lot of supervising or even other people on your team. And I think one easy way to do that is to follow up once you've turned an assignment in, to see if there's anything that either needed revised or looked into further, or even if there's something, okay, we've got this done, now what's the next step? And I think there's ways to build on that that are easy, and that shows that you're willing to continue to work and to continue to learn about processes or whatever your industry sets.
Great. Next slide.
So don't be shy or quiet for meetings or trainings.
So what you can do here, right, you can ask questions, you can participate, you can show engagement. And really, we think this is important to note, not only internally, but externally, right? Your company may bring in external speakers or people who are going to give maybe a training. And it's really important that, you give them a good impression as well. So I think this is something that is really good for, especially when you're early on in your career, to be mindful of is, yeah, it's okay to ask questions and maybe be that person to kind of see what you want to know more about. Because if you don't, then you're doing a disservice, right? Because you have valuable perspective that you're bringing that might not otherwise be reviewed or looked at. So don't ever feel like you shouldn't be able to ask a question or engage, no matter what level you're at. Go ahead, Emma.
Yeah, so, and we also did receive a question, which was kind of going to go off of what I was going to say, because while I've never been the shyest person and actually have a problem with dead space when I was in school, and if it waited too long, I would raise my hand. But we were asked, and did I just the message? We were asked about, there we go. Any tips for shy individuals who struggle with breaking through that barrier in meetings or trainings? So first, I think a lot of digital meetings or digital webinars really make this easy because there are ways to ask anonymously in most of the video softwares. So if you've got that question, you can answer it. In a way, you're not getting credit for it, but at the same time, it's still being asked and you're still learning from it. The other thing is, there are different settings. So if you're in a training, and especially if it's internal, the stakes are significantly lower. So I think that's a great way. And same with, if it's just your project group that you have a status meeting, those are pretty low stakes. So I think you can build your confidence that way and become comfortable with the material, become comfortable with your team. And then you can go on from there to ask maybe in an all department meeting the question that's been burning in your mind. And I think there's also a benefit to some of those obvious questions, because a lot of times I think people get so ingrained in their field or in a project that they lose the forest for the trees. And so sometimes, I've been that person to, okay, can we take a step back? I'm learning and falling on, hey, I haven't been here very long, to get those basic understandings or ask those basic questions, but it's brought up good conversations that maybe would have been assumed and we would have missed as a team.
Oh, here we go, Emma. Yep.
Oh, this one's written by me for me. Don't reply all without intention.
Oh, prior to sending that email to especially the larger group, make sure that you look at those recipients and email content. Believe me, we have all been there, myself included. Emma, go ahead and share your story.
So recently, which Scott's laughing because he was included on this reply all, we were asked by our department chair or our practice group chair at the law firm to send business plans for how we were going to, what our plans were for the year for business development, client development, improving ourselves. And I was so anxious about sending it that I wanted to get all of the right person on the email. That I hit reply all. And so everyone on my team saw my own plans for myself. Luckily, no one responded, but I did have to follow up and apologize in another reply all to the team. So.
Well, I'll mention, first of all, Emma, your plan was awesome. So you should feel good about it. And it's okay, right? I mean, that stuff is going to happen. And Emma did the right thing. She replied all with, just something, hey, but you don't have to necessarily do that either. It might depend on the circumstance. And it might not be like a reply all to a whole large group of people. It might just be one person who you inadvertently included. And that's okay. Be mindful. Things are going to happen though. Mistakes will happen. Nothing is typically not able to be fixed. So there's rarely kind of those really critical things, unless it's, in the legal world, something client confidential that you really shouldn't be sharing. But again, even in those circumstances, there are ways to navigate remedies for it. And it looks like there's a question here. Oh, a recommendation. Yeah, agreed. Be careful about forwarding those emails that have previous emails attached. Very good point.
Yes, and with that, definitely agree to look through not only the recipients, but the body of the email. And one step further, expert level, I guess, is to make sure that the subject still corresponds with what you're emailing about if it's changed. So I have one of the partners I work with, that's one of his biggest pet peeves is once we've started talking about a new topic, or if he's forwarding it out, the subject line to be clean. Okay, don't be afraid to Google.
Yeah, I mean, prior to asking, someone else, it's okay, to spend a few minutes on Google or any other search engine that you find useful to, just get a general sense, and especially on some maybe technical questions on, maybe it's something you've just never heard of before, and you want to just get a general sense of what you're going to be talking about with maybe someone in the next few minutes here. And I think Em and I both probably do this very frequently. There's a term of art in the legal profession, legalese, right? So there's always these words that are being used that really don't seem to have real true meaning, but in reality, there's some impact as it relates to the legal profession. And we see it a lot in documents. We see it a lot just in general conversations. And I very frequently just either Google or find a document that we've used in the past to view it in context, whether it's before I'm having an internal conversation or in particular conversation with a client, to try to get a good sense of what the context is we're going to be discussing. Emma, what are some things that you do here?
So yes, absolutely. When it comes to legal, I'll look up on the dictionary. But also I think what we do touches a lot of finance, and I know that this is a finance-based group. So I think Investopedia is something that has saved me a few times with more technical term of art for finance, or even just some general, the way that they present the general information is very helpful. When I was writing this slide, part of what I was also thinking about were those silly questions when it comes to using my Microsoft products. Because there are a lot of online guides about that, or even, question and answers about how do I mail merge, or, whatever it is. But I think you'll also learn, and this is kind of relying on the people that you work with, maybe in your area of work, there is a specific resource or a specific website that will provide you background information. And that would be definitely helpful before going into a meeting about that, or even once you get an assignment, before asking questions to the person, your supervisor, who's assigning it. Okay, don't focus on oh, if you can speak to, oh, okay, we will, yes. We'll get to those as they come up, or at the end we'll have time to make sure that we circle back to those questions. But don't focus on electronics during meetings or other office interactions.
Obviously, when we do have in-person opportunities to connect with each other, make the most of that time. I think all of us can realize how valuable, and probably we took it for granted, prior to COVID. So getting back into an in-person office environment, if you are, make use of that time. The superhero who came to mind here for me was Iron Man, right? So he's got all these gadgets and things that he can use and, easily get distracted by or tinkering with. And, don't do that. But certainly, take some tips from Iron Man too, because he obviously does a lot of good for the world.
Yes, and I think this one also is about balance. So if you're someone who uses electronics to take notes, that's fine, but just make sure that you're not hiding your face, or you're still getting the value of the meeting. Okay, don't let your personal life affect your workday.
Yeah, try to leave it at the door and engage maybe in mindfulness or other sort of strategies that work for you to find balance or manage that. So for me, the superhero who came to mind here was the Hulk, right? Try not to have that Hulk moment. Things are going to happen, right? You might have an issue that really stresses you out, or triggers some sort of a reaction, and that's okay. But do what you can to manage that personally. And if you do need resources, reach out to people. Maybe you need to talk to a colleague, or just step out of the office and go to lunch or coffee and say, we're just going to have a conversation outside of the work environment. And then, of course, if you have, formal policies or procedures within your company, I'm sure there are various resources there as well. How about you, Emma?
Yeah, I definitely think that one thing I've found is kind of what you actually can control. And if there is something upsetting you, but you can't control it during the workday, then stewing over it and letting it affect your work isn't very helpful or productive. And so I think that's the big thing, is you're not helping yourself in either personal or in work if you allow that to happen. But this is easier said than done. And that's why we all have our favorite songs or meditation or things like that to help deal with that.
So I know we're about halfway through now, and we've got one question here that, as Emma said, we'll actually touch on here in a few slides. Are there any initial questions on kind of the corporate side before we move to our work from home do's and don'ts? If not, Mark, we can move on.
Okay, don't treat working from home as a day on the couch.
Yeah, try to have your separate work area, create your own, work from home routines. This is obviously really important now, especially as we kind of see a lot of new policies and opportunities for companies that are permitting more remote flexibility with the work environment. But make sure, that you find a space that works for you, literally and figuratively, right? So I, for example, live in a very small apartment in downtown Indianapolis, and so it really wasn't very conducive to having a satisfactory work environment. So I had to get a little creative, right? Utilize my space however I could, and now, I'm able to kind of think through, okay, if I do need to work from home for a day, I know what types of technology I need. I know what kinds of connections I need, and those types of things to work sufficiently in my workspace. Emma, how about you?
Yeah, so there's the kind of psychological aspect of being able to shut off from work from home when you're home, because it is in the same environment. So kind of being able to turn off that work brain. Part of it, they say, to establish your own routines, but also maybe that involves still dressing for work. You definitely need to look professional on the camera or depending on your office. But sometimes just still getting ready or still going on a walk or whatever it is, that way you're in the right mindset, but then that way you can also walk away from work and turn it off for the evening, is, I think, really important.
I can't figure out how those glasses are not over his ears, they're under his ears. It's the things I think about.
Like how dogs wear pants.
The dogs wear pants thing is fantastic. If you guys haven't seen that, it's a great thought experiment.
Okay. So going along, and this is kind of what Scott was touching on, about planning your workspace.
Yeah, make sure that you're considering, especially again in the kind of remote situations, what kind of your background looks like, what's the lighting, your internet connections, external noise, especially for those video calls. Now, don't get us wrong though, things are going to happen. And I would say, in as much as it might feel uncomfortable when it happens to you, understand too, when it happens to someone else, try not to be judgmental, right? It's awkward sometimes, but that's okay as long as it's not disruptive to the overall effectiveness of the group. Make sure that you're trying to be understanding. I can't tell you how many times, Emma and I have been on calls and things where just something happens and we sort of laugh and just move on. And we really appreciate that, I think, as part of our team, and hopefully the team cultures elsewhere are able to do that as well.
Yeah, I have a couple dogs, so they're bound to bark sometimes. But also kind of part of this, when you're talking about internet connection, whether you need to have a wired connection because your Wi-Fi isn't reliable, or whether you need to upgrade, those are things to think about. But additionally, the security features. So your work may require certain connections, but also one of the big things that I don't know if work requires, but is suggested, is to turn off your Alexas if you're especially dealing with confidential information. We don't know where those really, if there's a big impact, but there is some security risk with the potential to be recorded. So just an additional consideration. Okay, don't be inconsiderate on virtual meetings.
So now we're going to get to the question in the chat. Make sure to mute yourself when it's appropriate. Know your audience, engage when you should have your camera on. This is tough sometimes, right? I mean, it's easy to just sort of click the camera off and maybe get distracted by something else or another project that you're working on. But it's really important, I think, in terms of especially a first impression, but even ongoing impressions, both internally and externally, to be mindful of when your camera's on. Emma and I were talking about this before as we were preparing for this presentation. It's a little bit of know your audience, really, right? So if we have our CEO, for example, giving us a firm-wide presentation, we think it's really important that we have our cameras on. Not only is that just a good way to, show appreciation for their time, but you never know when someone will connect a face with the name later. So especially if you work in kind of maybe a larger organization or you're on a call with maybe a larger group, it is really important to maybe have your camera on, or at least a picture if you can't have your camera on, just because you never know when someone might connect a face with the name that we otherwise would have been networking maybe in person for those types of opportunities. Emma, what do you think here?
Yeah, and I think there definitely is such thing as Zoom fatigue. And so those opportunities where you don't have to use a video may be appreciated. And so on smaller meetings, or whether it's a work group, sometimes we'll use Teams to present a document people are working on together, or to go through and use the screen sharing feature. And so I think on those, it would be appropriate, especially internally, to ask the people if you're on the phone, or just let them know, hey, when we're sharing the screen, I'm going to turn my video off unless anyone has any objections. I think there's a lot of ways to be upfront about it, and I think people will appreciate that, because they may also feel like they want to turn their camera off, but don't want to be the first person to make that step. Okay, don't take advantage of the flexibility.
Keep that regular schedule, right? Again, as maybe your companies or organizations open up to more flexible work arrangements, it's really important to kind of stay on your schedule. For me, it's important that I get, my run in, and that's something that I make sure that I prioritize every day and build in the time to make sure I get that done. Because if I don't, not only do I think about it all day, but it also just kind of throws me off, right? I mean, it's kind of my personal way that I'm able to clear my head, kind of step outside of the work environment and do something for me. And there are any number of things that you could do for yourselves. We tell, our summer associates and incoming associates often that, find that balance that works for you. The work environment can definitely be stressful at times, and there's going to be a lot of things that are going on, but maybe you're passionate about a nonprofit or want to get involved with something in your community. That's great. And make sure that you prioritize and find the time to give to those types of things. It is really important. Emma, what are some things that you do here?
Yeah, so, and I also think that this is another way of being considerate to the people that you work with and for, and considerate to yourself. So, because one thing that I'll say that I've been pretty bad about with the flexible environment is, okay, well, it's 3 o'clock and I'm hitting that 3 o'clock. Well, I'm just going to take an hour break because I'm already at home. So, and I kind of bargain with myself. So at 7 p.m., I'll get back on and I'll make up the hour that I missed from 3 to 4. And so not only is it impossible then to enjoy my evening because I've broken it up to go back to work and all of those things, but also that means from 3 to 4, if someone emails me, I may not be paying attention, but that's the time that they would expect me to be available. And so I think for the people that you're working with, if your work schedule is 9 to 5 inside in the office, then 9 to 5 work from home would also be appropriate. I know we got a question.
Yeah, a really good one. How do you get coworkers on board, when they're used to kind of the freedom of the work from home environment? Emma, I can kind of share maybe how we do our sort of, FBT team approach, right? So how we kind of structure things in terms of how we work here at Frost Brown Todd is that we work in various industry teams. And so not only am I working with colleagues here in my Indianapolis office, but I'm working with Emma, right, who's in Columbus. We work with our colleagues all across the country. And so as you can imagine, we all have maybe different time zones, a lot of different things going on. So what we do is that when we set meetings, whoever's coordinating the meeting is obviously mindful that, okay, we would love to start the meeting maybe at 8 a.m. Eastern time, but let's not forget that our colleagues in Texas would have to be up at 7 a.m. Central time. And so what we try to do, to the extent we can, and things happen, but we try to have more standing meetings that are just booked on the calendar for team check-ins. Maybe it's a casual 15 minutes and that's plenty. Maybe we spend the whole hour that we need, but we found that if we can have kind of those set times on our calendars, that we try not to move too much unless something comes up, that we're really able to function more effectively and communicate better, especially when we're maybe in this kind of remote setting or especially across offices.
Yeah, and I think the one thing that I appreciate about what Frost Brown Todd did is, and it just depends on your workplace, but about getting back into the office, we've now kind of adopted a hybrid approach. And so I'll do 2 to 3 days a week at home and 2 to 3 days in the office, but prioritizing the days that there are meetings in the office. And so I think it's kind of, it would be difficult to support a coworker, but it would also be nice to maybe say, okay, I'm coming into the office this day because of this, hope to see you there, as maybe an encouragement to come back into the office. And also, Scott, I thought that this about kind of trying to keep your schedule and to keep the difference between work and life might be a good place to answer the question about the weekend and email on your phone. I don't know if you have any thoughts about this, but I think this can be a difficult question to answer depending on the type of employee you are or the expectations in your industry. But I think that if you're a hourly employee who isn't supposed to work on the weekends or in the evenings, then my suggestion would be not to have work email on your phone because of the temptation to look at that. But I think then it becomes a little bit difficult if you are a salary employee who maybe has those expectations. Do you have any thoughts, Scott?
I think it's really different just in terms of each person's not only personal preferences, but also your manager or supervisor's expectations. And there might even be, corporate policies that kind of govern use of email during certain times. But I would say, obviously don't feel like you continually have to be working all day, every day. And it kind of goes back to what we talked about earlier in the corporate side of our slides, just about communicating, right? So there might be times, right, when you're out of the office and maybe you're at some event and you are truly unavailable. The one thing that you can do very easily is just let those who maybe you're working on a project team with say, hey, I'm going to be unavailable tonight, maybe through the entire weekend. I'll get back to you on Monday. If there's something urgent, right, please, don't hesitate to reach out to me. Again, this is all kind of specific to your own circumstance in terms of how comfortable and personal you are with your respective teams. But I really think a lot of it goes back to communicating effectively with your teams and setting those expectations. We have a number of clients who we work with in terms of serving as counsel to various boards and commissions. And we see this come up a lot, right? So there might be kind of an issue that comes up that seems to be an emergency, and maybe for some reason we can't call a quorum or we can't get the group to respond in a timely fashion because it's just maybe they're unavailable. So what we do from FBT's perspective, we do an annual training with all of our boards and commissions who we represent. And we set those expectations as part of the training to say, okay, maybe you're a board that wants to make sure that you have a check-in or a communication policy once a week, once a day. A lot of it just depends on kind of the agenda and maybe the workload that the board's expected to have. But I really think that managing those expectations early and maybe setting some sort of informal policy or collective agreement is really important.
Yeah, and I think going off of the communication, one thing, if I'm catching up on the weekend, sometimes I'll delay the email being sent until the following morning because I know it's not important for them to get it till then. But I think a lot of times people are working and they send out emails that they're catching up on. And so they may send it on a Saturday morning, not expecting any response until Monday, but that's just when the supervisor has the time to go through the emails or to do catch up. And so I think understanding, okay, if I check my email on Saturday, do I actually have to work on Saturday, or is this just something that can wait? Or having those conversations because I've been told, okay, disregard any of my emails, but I'm catching up. Just that open line of communication. All right. Don't try and wing assignments.
Yeah, again, kind of goes back to make your plan, get your task list, utilize effectively the time that you have, maybe with your work colleagues or with clients or otherwise. Again, no one size fits all here. So whatever kind of works best for you is great. I'm similar to Emma. I'm a timeline, a checklist kind of visual type of person. The next slide we'll talk about a little bit of some technology, but there are all sorts of great resources, maybe some that are specific to your company that you can utilize in terms of tools. So don't be hesitant to kind of embrace technology to help you with that as well. How about you, Emma?
Yeah, so I think the reason why we put this in the work from home rather than in the office setting, even though it's applicable for both, is because it's significantly more important when you can't just walk down to someone's office for a quick question. So you have to be more intentional about your communication and about meeting people when you are at home. So this way you can kind of, if you're doing a list or if you're doing questions, you'll have that when you meet with them in person, or if you need to make a call, or an email, it'd be much better to have all of your questions in one place than it would to send 3 different emails. And it's also more considerate that way.
Great.
Okay, don't forget that you have coworkers.
Yeah, be intentional, reach out when you're working on a project together, utilize the technology like I mentioned earlier. The one that comes to mind, we're going to start to kind of pull this all together to our corporate slides earlier, right? Think of the Avengers here, right? They all have all sorts of different skills, expertise, ways that they can contribute. And really the only way that they're all effective is if they're working together to do that. So find what works for you, or maybe a valuable skill or perspective that you can bring, and maybe also be cognizant of places that you're not as strong, and reach out and don't hesitate to say, hey, this might not be my expertise, but maybe we can bring in somebody who has this skill or is a little more comfortable handling this type of matter. And that's completely fine. I hope that most companies or entities that you all work for and with embrace this kind of team-based approach, because I really think it's a great way for us all to be more effective together. Emma?
So I have become a Teams believer, and I know we're on Zoom, but being able to share my screen or someone share their screen, and we can, whether we're reviewing a specific document, we're coming up with a timeline, we're coming up with a to-do list. Anytime we're working collaboratively, I think it's a lot easier to start from a central document or a central list. But also because then when you reach out and set up that meeting to get a project started, you're on the same page and you can talk about it so you don't have assumptions and then either cross wires or double work. And also about the technology. So for me, Teams or If your company uses Google, all of the Google Docs where you can work on the same document are really great. But I had someone on a Teams page recently set up a calendar so we could see the deadlines for that specific transaction in the Teams page. And so it was all kept together. And I think that's the best thing ever.
Yeah, I think that's right, Emma. And this is a really good place where, especially early on in your career, you can kind of show your value add. There are ways, that you can say, hey, there might be a new technology out there, or I have an idea of something I saw that might be helpful. Oftentimes, maybe some of your other colleagues are what we'll describe as late adapters, who maybe either don't want to embrace technology as much, or maybe just take a little bit more time to embrace it, which again is completely fine. But especially early on in your career, if you're kind of on the cutting edge of some of these advancements in technology, you can really show your added value that way.
Okay, don't ignore your resources.
So all sorts of things you can do here, right? Some tips that we wanted to share, keep a list or contact sheet if you don't already have one, and especially IT. I can't tell you, like I mentioned earlier, how many times I was in my apartment during COVID and, the Wi-Fi either wasn't working and it was an important meeting, or the document system wasn't functioning. And the first time it happened, I realized, wow, I don't have my work phone where I can just dial the extension for IT. And next thing you know, I'm kind of in a tough spot. So I immediately, of course, programmed that number into my phone and made sure I had them on speed dial. And one thing here, be gracious and thankful for all of your resources and people who help you with that kind of stuff, because they get a lot of requests. And oftentimes in situations when almost every request they get is an emergency or seems to feel like one. So when you do reach out to your IT teams or others, don't forget to just kind of say thank you and appreciate the work that they all do for you as well. Emma?
Yeah, I think the only thing I have to add is that the number of or the contract or whatever you need to reference, if you need to call your internet provider, having that handy as well, because that is something that wouldn't be controlled by your employer, assuming that you have Spectrum or your own. But I will say having to search through emails when I'm already stressed about not having internet is not something that's great.
All right, and getting towards our final slide here.
Okay, don't forget to be aware of your workplace guidelines.
Yeah, read and understand your employer's remote work policy is the do here. As lawyers, Em and I thought it would be appropriate, of course, to remind you that you have to read your policies and make sure that you're following all of those. It is really important, and there is some level of intention that's gone into all of those. And if you're ever in doubt, make sure that you're in communication with either your HR department, your managers, your supervisors, as appropriate, to the extent that issues come up, things arise, again, whether you're in the office in the corporate setting, outside of the office in a remote setting, or otherwise. I think just know that you're going to have resources and people there who can help you navigate some of these things too. How about you, Emma?
Yeah, so I think that, well, and this is me saying this in support of general policies, but I think they may sometimes be boring to read, or some of the asks in a policy may seem, well, why are they making me do this? So with hybrid work, one of the issues is taxes and how you pay, or which jurisdiction you pay your taxes to. So if you're working part-time from home in a different place than your work is located, you may have issues. So your employer may have you fill a survey or do those certain things. And just being aware that this not only has an implication for your work, but also could have an implication for your personal life or taxes. It's really important to know what you're getting yourself into.
So that kind of takes us to the end, civic superheroes, and everybody, thank you. We really appreciate the opportunity to share some perspective with you. If things come up in the future, Emma and I both are happy to be a resource however we can. Emma, unless you have any concluding remarks, I think we take questions if there are any, but we certainly want to be respectful of everyone's time.
Thanks, Mark.
Emma and Scott, thank you. That was fantastic. And I think we all can strive to be superheroes at the office, regardless of our office environments. I know we range from small to large on this. And Professor Boyle, I see you came off mute. Would you like to add anything?
Oh, you guys will live forever. I am a professor, so some of your stuff will go on for generations when I teach students.
Great.
So happy to help.
Well,
Thank you all for
again.
joining, and we've got another Lunch and Learn tomorrow, so hope to see you again. And again, have a great rest of your Tuesday. Take care, everybody.
Thank
Thank you.
you.